Hi, in this presentation, I'm going to talk about theories and hypotheses, what they are and what role they play in political science research. So, theories are really important. Theories explain the world, and I like to think of theories as basically scientific storytelling. Right? A story is a chain of causally linked events. And so when you tell a story, you have to have all the steps, right? You got to have each step in the process that leads from beginning to whatever the ending is. But a good story also strips out extraneous facts and events, things that don't affect the ending, and, keeps the story going. Extraneous detail, not necessary, right? And so that's when I talk about telling a story, I'm like, hey, you're telling me the essential causal effects. And sometimes we call it the causal mechanism that's at play that produces the ending, right? Now, a theory is an explanation of some phenomena based on underlying or unobserved phenomena or phenomenon, right? So phenomena, I love that word, and i.e. it's a story. And this is the the idea from the philosophy of science of what a theory is, and Hempel uses a definition very similar to this one that greatly affects me. But there's this idea, we see something happening in the world and we want to explain what's going on under the surface, right? And I always think of Neo in the Matrix when he finally conceives of everything. He sees the code streaming down behind it, and he's seeing what's going on underneath. And so theories, are explanations of phenomena based on these underlying and possibly unobserved, right? We might not realize that these other things are related, phenomena and stuff. So that's the storytelling. So that's what theories are from my point of view in a nutshell. Now, our understanding of the world and how we approach it in social science is to think in terms of variables, right? So we have a dependent variable, which is the thing that, is the effect. If we have a causal explanation, we have cause and effect, this is the effect. But more importantly, the dependent variable is what we're trying to explain. It's what we're interested in understanding. So the dependent variable is what theories explain. It's the ending of the story, if you will. The independent, sometimes known as explanatory variable, which, by the way, that's a much more intuitive label. When you say explanatory variable, I get it, right? Independent variable. So the explanatory or independent variable is the variable that's the causal factor in an explanation. It's the thing that is thought to determine in some way the value of the dependent variable. That is why it's called the dependent variable, because the value of the dependent variable depends on the independent variables, which are thought to be, independent, right? They come from somewhere else. We don't know where they come from. That's not the story we're telling. We're not explaining the independent variables. We're explaining the dependent variables. Hope that makes sense. But this idea of variables, one causing another, is very at the core of our approach to explaining the world in social sciences. So, theories are explanations. And I have a story here, right? Why do dogs do what they do, right? And for some reason, years ago, I hit on this, and this is how old I am. This is back when Cesar Millan, the dog whisperer, was out there, and Victoria Stilwell. They had competing shows solving problems with dogs. And Cesar Millan had dominance theory. He said, look, dogs have a pack mentality. They respect alphas, and you have to be the pack leader. And so you have to interpret what you're doing and how the dog is reacting to it based on the idea that this is what's going on, right? This explains the dog's behavior, the pack and the dominant structure. Victoria Stilwell has none of that. She's like, it's about positive reinforcement, right? You have to understand what the dog is getting for its behavior, and so you have to approach it from that point of view. These are two different explanations for why dogs do what they do, and this is a very important part of social science, that we have rival explanations, right? We have multiple things going on. And by the way, when we talk about, we're talking about people, not dogs, but when we're dealing with, the dogs have some agency, right? And so they have many of the things that complicate social science are there with dogs. And it could be all of this stuff is going on, right? It could be both of these explanations that, yeah, the pack mentality, that has an impact, but also, yeah, positive, when they get cheese and peanut butter and, what happens when they do something might have an impact. Both of these explanations could hold weight. So we have rival explanations. Who's right? Very important to understand, that it's hard to figure out whether a theory is right. You have selection bias in that, Caesar and Victoria only got certain dogs, right? They probably weren't doing a random study of dogs. They were dealing clinically with whatever dog they had for that episode, right? And also, each one has a confirmation bias, right? Confirmation bias means that you tend to look for, and whenever you find information that supports your point of view, you tend to focus on it, you tend to look for it, you tend to seize on it. And so selection and confirmation bias are always at play. There can be confounding effects, right? There are other things that might come into play. And there's always test and placebo effects. I mean, both of these folks are going in, are working with a dog, and are probably affecting the dog's behavior one way or another, hopefully for the better. But there are a lot of things that go on, right? And so anecdotal support exists for practically any theory, right? There's all different ways you can get it, but you also are going to find counterexamples to theories, right? Theories, any theory out there tends to have a counterexample. It's a little weird, like in international relations, we have the democratic peace theory, and there's, very few, if not zero, counterexamples to the idea that democracies don't fight one another. And people spend a lot of time looking for counterexamples, but it's a bit bizarre that scholars would do that, because most of the time a theory predicts a trend or a greater likelihood, or almost every theory in social science has counterexamples. And to come up with a counterexample and then say, well, this disproves the theory. No, because our theories don't think, we're not talking about neutrons and electrons that should always act one way. And so if one doesn't act the right way, then they all don't act that way. No. Every theory in social science is, I don't want to say everything, I don't want to make it too, but the counterexamples are coming, right? We expect counterexamples. So our methodology has to sort out through these things. We are going to get through the biases, get through the confounding effects, and we have to try to say, are the counterexamples important, right? And, how many, and so basically methodology is going to test a hypothesis over sets of multiple observations to try to figure out if, on balance, it's more likely that that there's some effect, that something's going on. There might be other effects. It might not be deterministic. It might not always happen this way. It might be probabilistic. But do we see an influence? Does the independent variable match up in some way with the dependent variable and correlate, right? We look for correlations with statistics, and that's what we're frequently trying to do, figure out which theory is right, because it's very often a contest of rival theories. So, a hypothesis. This is a testable statement about the empirical relationship between cause and effect, right? So, it's testable and it's empirical, but it's related to the theory, right? And so it basically, if this story that the theory tells is true, what should we see in the world, right? If this is the smoke, if this is the fire, right? The theory is describing the fire, where should we see the smoke, right? We're looking for observable phenomena, and there's the idea of predicted empirical manifestations. That's a really fun way of saying it. But we're saying, look, if the theory's correct, what should we see? That's what a hypothesis is in its essence. And the thing about a hypothesis, it's predictive. In this case, this will happen, right? We need some prediction, right? Higher levels of one thing, of the independent variable, will be associated with higher levels of the dependent variable, or lower levels if it's a negative relationship. We're going to get a prediction. It's also got to be observable. We have to be able to see it, right? There are a lot of theories that will talk about things going on that we can't observe, whether they be individuals, whether they be decision making behind closed doors, like I say, someone's thought process, their choice process. There'll be some things that you can't directly observe, but there will be other parts of the theory that you can observe. And so we look for the things that we can actually see, right? These are empirical manifestations that we can say, all right, is that happening? And then it's got to be testable, right? We have to have a test. It has to be something that we can see. Very often, the testability, have there been examples of this in the past that we can look at? Can we predict the past to see if the theory was right, if this theoretical relationship was at play in past events? If you're talking about something that never existed and only exists in the future, well, it's not testable because it hasn't happened yet, right? So we have to have some ability to test a hypothesis. But this is about how we try to say, okay, we have a story about the world. Let's see whether or not it holds water, whether it's likely to be true or not. So as an example, let's take protectionist theory, right? And this is the idea that trade destroys jobs, right? That exports, there's a very conventional wisdom out there that exports support jobs and imports take them away. And so the protectionist idea is that, American, the story that's told is that unfair foreign competition has destroyed American manufacturing and destroyed employment in the country and, made America not great, which is why someone said we need to make it great again. Okay. This has been around a long time. So, okay, if that's the story, we need a hypothesis. Now, there are a lot of hypotheses you could get from this, right? There are a lot of them out there. But I'm focusing on this one, right? All right, if exports produce jobs, imports take them away, a hypothesis here is that there should be a positive relationship between the trade deficit of the U.S., right? A trade deficit means there's more imports than exports. So the more the balance, the deficit, the greater the deficit, the more imports overwhelm exports, the more unemployment we should have, right? If we're worried about losing jobs, then, right, we should see a positive relationship between the trade deficit, which is itself negative, right, and U.S. unemployment, right? So when we have a higher trade deficit, we should have higher unemployment. That is a hypothesis. There could be other ones. You could find other things, but that is a hypothesis. By the way, just there's the data, and it kind of cuts out in 2009. I did this a long time ago, but one thing is, hey, guess what? It doesn't even come close, right? Very often those lines, if they're supposed to be positively related, meaning they should go in the same direction at the same time. Right? If one increases, the other should be increasing. They shouldn't be equal necessarily, but they should be moving in the same direction at the same time. Frequently, they are not. Right? Sometimes there is, right? Or if you can see my arrow right here, it was sort of looking, but here we're definitely not moving the same direction. Here we're not. So point is, we don't see what the theory predicts we should see. That's hypothesis testing. That's what we're about. Now, of course, you can have other hypotheses, you can do other things, but that's a quick and dirty test. So, how this fits. Statistics test hypotheses, right? Statistics ask, because sometimes you could have, we just eyeballed the data, right? With that chart we just saw. We just eyeballed it, which, by the way, don't discount the value of doing that, right? That can be useful. However, statistics will say, hey, is there actually a relationship between those two variables that we just saw? That was data. We can do that. And statistics is all about testing hypotheses, right? And statistics will tell us the direction of a relationship. Is it positive, negative? How strong is it? And is it statistically significant? And this is the focus. Most textbooks focus strictly on that part of it. But, this whole presentation has been, hey, look, you need to understand the importance of theory. Right? A lot of methods textbooks assume you already know that, or assume they don't talk about that. Research design, right? This is about how do you examine a theory? How do you derive hypotheses and test them? Research design is, I basically had a little one right there where I said, all right, if this is the theory, then let me come up with a hypothesis, let me collect data and test it, right? I did a little quick thing, and if I told you ahead of time, hey, I'm going to, here's this hypothesis, I'm going to get this data from these places, and I'm going to make a chart and put it up there. That's a design, very mini one, but, right? So design is about how we go about that, right? Here's a theory. What are the hypotheses? Because hypotheses can be difficult to find sometimes, right? What are the hypotheses and how can I test them, right? And so that is something that is, when I teach research methods, very often that's the design, the focus of the course, the focus of things that we do. So that is how this all fits. That is a quick overview of the role of theories and hypotheses. And, just big thing. Theories tell us, how we think the world works, right? The role of science is, if we're trying to explain the world, well, the theories do the explaining. The empirical research, the testing of hypotheses, tells us whether these theories hold water or not. We never prove a theory, right? We just subject it to tests. If it survives tests and it does better than other theories, we tend to think it's likely to be true. But in science, we never prove a theory, right? We might have great confidence in it, like the theory of evolution, but it's never proven, right? Because we could come up with new aspects of it and new ideas. But that's how theories work. They are explanations, they are causal stories, and they're very important to our understanding of the world. And hypotheses are important to our checking whether or not our understanding of the world is bullducky or not. Hope that makes sense.